Welcome back to the report. Since the Islamic State group stormed its way through Iraq and Syria, cultural riches in both countries have increasingly been threatened with theft. Nazli Tarsley takes a look at the impact on the cultural heritage of both civilizations.
Known formally as the mother of all civilizations, Iraq today is best known as an epicenter of political violence, particularly in the aftermath of America's 2003 invasion. Attracting considerably less attention than rampant conflict is the crumbling of Iraq's archaeological ruins and uprooting of its cultural heritage. While it remains unclear exactly who might be behind the latest upsurge of looting, fears of further losses are fast growing since the Islamic State group stormed onto the political world stage. I caught up with Mark Al-Tawil, lecturer in Near Eastern archaeology, who visited Iraq during one of the most devastating periods of cultural loss.
And in fact, Iraq's archaeological sites and cities are very important. Many foundational aspects, I would say, of modern civilization, or let's just call it our way of life as it is today, is in fact very much based off things that were developed first in that region, if not first, fairly early on, everything from agriculture all the way to cities, laws, and things like that.
At risk is the history of the world's first settled civilization that rose some 5,000 years ago and whose treasures lie scattered across modern-day Iraq and Syria and other key strategic cities across the West. Far from being new, these developments are reminiscent of the plundering Iraq witnessed in 2003, the tragic year its National Museum was ransacked and National Library was set ablaze. Fast forward 10 years, and the region's cultural heritage is even more at risk, as prized archaeological sites are absorbed into the illicitly run Islamic State group economy. After the group's seizure of Mosul in June, more than 4,000 archaeological and cultural sites, where the splendors of Mesopotamia lie, fell into the hands of IS members, allowing an artifact mafias to thieve, flog and smuggle conflict antiquities.
In a similar way to the diamond trade and other commodity trades, some people identify blood antiquities as those that involve human rights violations in their production and their trade, and some specify conflict antiquities as a subset where the funding doesn't only go to groups that commit human rights violations.
In an effort to curb the smuggling of irreplaceable goods, 2 months ago the British government enforced a statutory law banning the import of Syrian cultural property believed to have been illegally removed or stolen. But smuggled goods have become worryingly visible in auction houses across Europe, with collectors advised to be more vigilant.
Rick Santalera, a cultural property lawyer, studied the scale of imports from Iraq, Syria, Turkey and Egypt to the United States and showed massive increases between 2011 and 2013. And even if you argue that some of that is related to normal economic activity, it would seem difficult to explain a massive increase in the scale of the cultural economy of Syria right now.
But the illegal shipment of legally declared Syrian goods, many fear, could allow stolen items to slip beneath the radar as they creep back into the mainstream market. The scale of ethnic cleansing against minorities by IS fighters appears to have extended to the destruction of historic sites and spaces worshippers gather in. But as long as silence prevails above the prevention of antiquity theft, the direction of future Iraq and Syria, its population's self-understanding and prospects for reconciliation remain uncertain.
We don't have time to lose because extremists are trying to erase the identity because they know that if there is no identity, there is no memory, there is no history.
These crimes have completely transformed Iraqi and Syrian cityscapes, previously adorned with proudly stood minarets, whose broken pieces now glimmer in the scattered debris of destruction. The scale of ruination is most visible in Iraq, where sacred architecture, mosques, churches, shrines, and tombs have been willfully demolished. And in Syria, where the corridors of the emptied National Museum whistle in silence. Nazli Tarsley, The Report.
Joining me to discuss this is Iraqi archaeologist Dr. Lamia Al-Gailani and Leila Amineddoleh, who's a partner at Galluzzo Amineddoleh, who's a professor of art and cultural heritage for the Fordham University School of Law. Lamia, How serious is the level of destruction of these artifacts now?
It's quite serious. Till now, because they are recently there, till now they've concentrated on really destroying, especially shrines, Muslim shrines, Islamic shrines, because they don't believe in, and it is devastating because most of the ones in northern Iraq, especially Mosul, is from the Abbasid period, which is 13th, 14th century, and quite unique pieces, buildings. That's mostly.
So, and is the destruction on the same level as it was in 2003 after the invasion?
2003 is different because there it was looting, not destruction. So they looted the sites, they looted the Iraq Museum, but it's a completely different thing. This time it's not looting as such, it's destroying buildings completely. Yeah.
But Leila, let me bring you into the discussion, but there is now talk of some considerable amount of theft. Is this turning up on international markets? Leila, can you hear me?
Yes, sorry about that. My phone was on mute so that I wouldn't disturb everyone. It's very difficult to tell at this time exactly how much is entering the market, because what we see is that the objects will enter the black market and they will be traded amongst collectors and dealers that are not on the legitimate market. These are not appearing at auction houses and at museums yet. What we'll see is we'll find the emergence of these objects after the fact. We may have to wait another 5, 6, 10 years before they come on the market, and at that time we'll be able to really determine how much of these objects are being traded.
Here in the UK, there's been some pretty severe sort of legislation passed penalising people for dealing in these artefacts. Is that true in the States as well?
Actually, about 2 weeks ago, a bill was introduced that's calling for greater protection. It's called the Protect and Preserve International Cultural Property Act, H.R. 5703, and that was introduced about 2 weeks ago, and it would create a cultural property coordinator who would set up import restrictions to prevent looted objects from Syria from entering into the U.S. borders.
See,
but that hasn't been enacted yet.
It hasn't been enacted. And do you think when it is, is what you were saying earlier really that it's a little bit early to expect these things to turn up on the markets? Because some of the reports are saying that this is the Islamic State selling this in order to fund their military and political activities. So I'd just like you to sort of tie that up for me. If they're selling it, it must be turning up somewhere.
Yes, it looks like it is entering the market. We've seen that there's a 145% increase of Syrian cultural objects in the U.S. between 2011 and today. So there definitely is an increase of Syrian objects entering the market in the U.S. However, it's difficult to tell which are being looted, which are legitimate. But the fact that there has been such an increase in Syrian objects strongly suggests that some of them are looted, that it's a mix of the legitimate and illegitimate objects being introduced together, because it is difficult to tell which objects are looted. And it is possible for people to create fake provenances, fake histories for these objects. So at this point of time, I think it's difficult, especially with the huge influx of objects entering the market in the U.S. and around the world. So there's difficulty in measuring the number of objects, in particular because I believe a lot of these objects are entering the black market, not necessarily going to museums and auction houses and public markets, but probably entering private collections that aren't being publicized.
Okay. I mean, in a way, if something bad's got to happen, you would rather that happen because the objects aren't being destroyed. But what you're saying is that most of this is, in fact, destruction.
It's destruction. At the moment, in the north of Iraq, where ISIS, let's say, the Islamic, is the destruction much more than real looting. They've looted the churches, but they didn't destroy them. They destroyed the Islamic shrines. It's very interesting to see what the reason. The looting, the real looting, which is still going on since 2003 and before, is in the south.
And that's still continuing now?
That's continuing.
Okay.
But not as much as, of course, before, but it's there.
And I mean, it's obvious what the kind of historical and cultural impact of this is. But is there a kind of contemporary political impact? As we were suggesting in that film, that people are kind of having their national identity erased by this.
Absolutely. It is. I mean, people are very, in Mosul, the people now, because of the destruction, they are extremely sad about it, because for them, they were very proud of quite a number of these shrines, like Nabi Yunus and so on. And there is a story, is that one of their icons, which is the leaning minaret, the woman in the surrounding of the building just went and slept there. And they are still, apparently, still keeping guard that it will not be. Because they tried to have it also destroyed. So, yes, people do have that.
Could you give a kind of comparison for people who aren't familiar with the artifacts that you're describing in Iraq? If we were talking about a similar level of destruction in Britain, what would we be looking at? Would we be looking at the looting of the National Gallery? Would we be looking at the destruction of Canterbury Cathedral?
Yeah, when the 2003 looting of the Iraq Museum, it's another, like the British Museum. I mean, it was the biggest, and it has the most unique material. And the destruction of what happened in these are icon pieces that has been destroyed. Like in 2006, they destroyed that the Samarra Mosque. That is a very big thing, you know. So it's like a cathedral being gathered. And this is now the fear for, it's across sectarian things. I mean, what is happening now, there is no difference. It has nothing to do with sect, both sides.
Leila, you said that the legislation has just kind of gone through. Is that the first legislation? Is it the only thing that's being done about this?
It's the first piece of legislation that has directly addressed the problem of looted Syrian antiquities. However, there are measures in the U.S. to protect looted objects from entering our market. There's the Cultural Property Implementation Act, in which objects can be seized by the U.S. government. Objects that are stolen and that enter our borders can be seized. So that has been used in the past. We've seen that used with objects coming in from Europe. Also, under U.S. law, no one who, thief can never get title to stolen work. So objects that were stolen, that were looted, can never, an owner of those objects can never have proper title. So there are laws that are basic to U.S. legal system that prohibit an individual from taking title to stolen work. We also have the CPA that I mentioned earlier, and also internal guidelines for museums. For example, museums who are members of the AAMD and the AAN must not acquire objects that lack a pre-1970s provenance. So objects that don't have a history that you can trace prior to 1970. So museums that are members of these organizations are not purchasing these objects. So there are different guidelines and laws within the U.S. However, of course, there are ways to get around this. We've seen different museums and dealers and owners who are able to create these fake provenance documents and who claim that they have legitimate title to these objects. So
okay.
Really,
Thanks for that. Just let me ask Lamia one last question. What does this mean in terms of the future of Iraq? Can any of this be recovered, rebuilt, or is it irrevocably lost now?
The destruction of the shrines is irrevocable, unfortunately, because it's right down to the ground. It's.
And what do you think that impact will be on the future of the country?
it's something one can't explain really how bad it is and how tragic. Yeah.
Lamia, Leila, thanks very much for that. I'm afraid that's all that we've got time for, and indeed all we've got time for on this episode of The Report. I want to thank all my guests on today's show and to thank you at home for watching. Do remember that you can keep up with us on Twitter by following @IslamChannel and using the hashtag #TheReport. For now, we'll leave you with some scenes from New York, where emergency workers have been filling sandbags in preparation for potential flooding as warming temperatures begin to melt the up to 7 feet of snow that fell recently. But we'll be back tomorrow, so do join us then. Till then, good night.